Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Plotlines. I'm your host, Connor, and today is a very fun episode. And uh, it's brought on by my finishing of Charles's book, Puritan's Empire. I was
Mm,
reading it, and it sparked some interesting ideas in my head, and I just had to have Charles on to talk about it. Welcome back, Charles.
thank you. Great to be back, Connor, and glad to hear you finished Puritan's Empire. It's not a short read, it's
No, it's not, and it's depressing.
depressing.
Yes, it's
It's
depressing.
What do you mean depressing? It's a feel-good book.
Okay. News to me, apparently.
No, it's a feel-good book. I mean, I talk about the counterculture, the mamas and the papas, and yeah, you
Also,
know,
like the part about the book that is probably the hardest to read is not actually depressing. It's just like different regions of the United States. Like
yeah.
that, you go in depth about each region and the Catholic elements of it, but it's just it's very small stories, so it's sometimes it's like, okay, we're getting into these small little stories for a little bit. Word from our affiliate, Bishop Sheen Rosaries. You've probably worn through the chain of your cheap plastic rosary. Other rosaries simply can't stand up to the wear and tear of everyday life. Bishop Sheen rosaries are made of solid metal beads and paracord to withstand any condition and are backed with a lifetime warranty. Upgrade your rosary to a Bishop Sheen rosary made to fit your lifestyle or buy one for a friend. Each rosary sold supplies 2 weeks of food for a school kid in Uganda. You use the exclusive link down below to help support our efforts here at Plotlines. The link will take you to sheenrosaries.com. Be sure to use the code Plotlines10.
Well, there's a reason for that. The country is made up of these small little stories. I mean, you got to bear in mind that you yourself live in a town, and that town, I can guarantee you, is filled with history. But around you is a county, and that county has a lot of history in it. But that county is part of a state, the state too, and that state is part of a region, in your case, the Midwest, which,
Mhm.
even though it's probably the dullest of we don't need to go there, do we? We don't have to say things like that, egregious insults for nothing. Anyway, the Midwest is not nearly as dull as everyone thinks. There's a lot of interesting stuff there, not least of which the terribly ornate county courthouses that dot the place all the way from Kansas to Ohio.
Kansas is part of the Midwest.
Yeah, you didn't know?
I I don't know. There's a lot of arguments about what the Midwest is.
I'll make it simple. It's the old Northwest, that is Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Wisconsin, and Michigan, plus Iowa, Minnesota, the Dakotas, Kansas, and Nebraska.
Okay, that has simplified it. Thank you, Charles.
That's the Midwest. And what is the biggest city in the Midwest?
Chicago.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, can you name the other major regions of our country?
Uh, the South,
Yeah, from Maryland to Texas.
the Northeast,
Well, I would say New
or New
England and the Mid
England.
Atlantic. Yeah, New England and the Mid Atlantic,
Okay, and
which
then sorry.
the Mid Atlantic only has three states, really: Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York.
And then we got the Southwest.
Yeah, Arizona, New Mexico. And
What's Colorado part of?
yeah, I guess, yeah, you could. Colorado is really part of the Rocky Mountains slash Great Basin,
Okay,
which would be Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, Montana, and Nevada.
you should draw more maps. That's what this is telling me.
That would have cost.
What?
That would have cost the publishers more money.
No, no. I mean, you should just. Not for the book necessarily, just in general.
Oh, well.
People need to see maps drawn by you instead of others.
Well, that may be. And then there's the far west. You know what that is?
California, Seattle, or not Seattle. That's not a state.
Not yet.
Washington and Oregon.
Yeah, in Idaho, I suppose.
Oh, Idaho counts.
Well, Idaho is part of the Oregon country, after all.
Okay.
Washington, Oregon, Idaho. Although you could argue that it belongs really to the Great Basin / Rocky Mountains.
Well,
And Alaska and Hawaii, who just have nothing in common with each other except they got tacked on at the end.
they're the fact that they're just out there is what they have in common.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
And you know, it used to be as late as the 1930s or 40s, guidebooks to Alaska always included an introduction about Seattle because that was where the major ships went to Alaska from.
Oh, okay.
So the idea was that if you were going to go to Alaska, you'd be going through Seattle.
Okay. Well, interesting enough, this episode isn't about the the different regions of the United States, is it, Charles?
No, it's not. It's about the post World War II Wonderland.
And one of the things about the post World War II Wonderland is that it really seems to me that we lost. We lost World War II.
What do you mean we lost? We became the arsenal of democracy. Our bases
Exactly.
and our troops encircled the globe like a fat lady's girdle.
Well, it seems like we allowed the Soviet Union to just destroy everything leading up to that.
Well, they got Eastern Europe, and then they got China and North Korea, then North Vietnam, and Cuba, and various African countries that weren't quite sure what they were, but took Soviet aid. But that doesn't mean they won. They fell, didn't they? 1989 to 91 saw the dismantling of the Soviet Empire.
Well,
See?
but who really won World War II? I think it might have been Hitler because he achieved really what his goals were, which was to destroy Europe basically. I mean, that wasn't his like stated goal. Obviously, he wanted to win, but in his sort of he wanted to win the war, but by destroying everything that most people hold dear, he kind of did.
Well, he did. And as a secondary winner, there was, of course, Uncle Joe Stalin, as Roosevelt called him, because he did accomplish what he wanted to accomplish. He got Eastern Europe, and he ended up getting China, too.
Hmm. And
Um,
England just or Britain just got sandwiched.
well, as did our other European allies. And in the end, they all lost their empires. Um, being allied to the United States is not always conducive to your health.
Yeah, it's like being abused.
A little bit. You come back for more because there's nobody else in town to smack you around.
Or
Or
you, or if the other guy would just take you over completely.
that's the other thing. And of course, we did. I mean, there was a little bit of resistance, of course, with de Gaulle. Uh, one of my most amusing stories about him. Uh, JFK ordered him out of Algeria, which he did, and something like 1 million Frenchmen had to leave Algeria in 2 weeks, which was quite unpleasant, and they did. But that brought de Gaulle a lot of displeasure on the part of many of his fellow Frenchmen. But it led to his deciding that France was going to have to go it alone because she couldn't trust her great ally.
How long
So,
was De Gaulle in power?
from 1958 to 1969,
Okay.
11 years. I don't remember his coming into power because I was not born, but I do recall his going out of power. I remember when he resigned, and he resigned because of the riots of '68, which they ruined a lot in Europe.
I just realized before we everything before your birth could be called BC.
Do you do your own work or do you have writers?
All me, Charles, all me.
Yeah, I was gonna say you better change riders, but you're stuck, so forget it.
Unfortunately, that's can't do that.
Oh well, it's all right. I can work with what we've got. Don't worry about it. But no, seriously. So De Gaulle immediately began pushing the French arms industry until France became independent of the United States in terms of their military needs. So then what happened was in 1965, President Johnson ordered the British to turn over the keys to their nuclear silos, which they did, since they'd been very careful not to pursue any independent course since Suez in 56. But he then approached de Gaulle for the same favor. And de Gaulle asked him, well, let me ask you, Mr. President, if it was a choice between New York and Paris, would you sacrifice New York to save Paris? He said, no, certainly not. And de Gaulle said, well, that's exactly what I would expect you to say, since you're president of the United States and not France. But that's why you're not getting the keys to my nuclear silo.
The funny thing is, I think modern presidents would say, "Oh, we'll save Paris."
I doubt it.
Are you sure?
I don't think they wouldn't know what that meant.
I'm
See,
sorry.
when you're really stupid, it's and you don't know anything, it's tough. Senility is also not helpful in a president,
No.
contrary to what President Hindenburg might have thought. But at any rate, Johnson huffed and he puffed, and he said, "Well, if you won't give me control of your nuclear arsenal, you've got to get out of NATO." And de Gaulle, much to Johnson's surprise, said, "Well, don't want to do it, but if that's the price, bye bye."
But he didn't leave NATO.
He didn't leave the political alliance, but he left the military alliance.
Oh.
And so the headquarters of NATO had to move from Fontainebleau, south of Paris, to Belgium.
Hmm.
And it turned out being a much more expensive thing for the United States and NATO than it was for de Gaulle.
To have to move.
Yeah,
Yeah. So are they not part of the military alliance at the moment?
they are now. They rejoined it, I think, in the early 90s, late 80s, I think. But um, they were not for a very long time.
Yeah. I've heard it said that uh, Britain getting into World War II basically had to choose between its empire or saving Europe.
Well, that's fair enough. That was what they were. That was the choice they were handed, and they chose another war.
No. It's interesting because the United States is always told to be sort of the heroic savior of Europe, uh, but it's easy to be sort of this quote unquote savior when you don't have anything. You're not really giving up anything.
It makes it a lot easier, sure.
Yeah,
I mean, with the British, as I say, they very definitely could have done one or the other thing. They couldn't do both. Whereas for the United States, it was, amongst other things, not simply an opportunity to save the free world. It was also a tremendous opportunity to expand American influence and control,
yeah.
which we
Now,
did.
now let's so in France during the war, Pétain was in control of Vichy France.
No,
Now, you talk a lot about how in these Axis controlled countries, there were a lot of uh, sort of mixed feelings about sort of who to support and what side to be on. Because if you're in the middle of this occupied land, you're pretty stuck. You don't have many options.
no.
So, what was the Patan government like?
Well, basically, you got to remember first and foremost who Marshal Pétain was. He was a big war hero from World War One. He had stopped the Germans at Verdun. When the French army mutinied, he put an end to the mutiny peacefully. Uh, so he was seen as a very heroic figure. And when the civilian government collapsed in France as a result of the German invasion, they called on Pétain basically to save the country. So he, on the other hand, and a great many of his supporters, especially in the beginning, saw the Third Republic itself as the reason for France's defeat. Its decadence, its anti clericalism, its irreligion, and also bear something else in mind, and that is that when the Germans invaded France, the communists were collaborators because the Germans and Soviets had signed the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, and as a result of that, all the communist parties that obeyed Moscow, including the CPUSA under the redoubtable Gasol, uh, they all echoed the line. So Hitler was no longer a bad guy, and any attempt to resist it was a capitalist's war. So the French communists blew up blew up bridges behind retreating French troops and things like that. It really made things very difficult. So they did not improve their standing with the average Frenchman. So the treaty that Pétain was made to sign by the Germans, because they beat them, they were defeated. The country was divided in two. Although Pétain nominally was head of state in the north as well, he really only controlled southern France and the colonies. Um, he made an agreement with Churchill that if the Germans attempted to take the French Navy, he'd scuttle it. And that's a very important thing to remember. Not trusting him, the Churchill, after the treaty was signed with Germany, Churchill ordered an attack on the French Navy at Oran in Algeria. That was a terrible mistake. They didn't do very well, but it did embitter a lot of the French toward the British for attacking their fleet. In the beginning, Petain's government was filled with a lot of traditional Catholic types, royalists, anti-republicans, and so on. But as time went on, the Germans put more and more pressure on him to replace those with ex-socialists and communists who were much more malleable. The communists, when in 1941, when the Soviet Union was invaded, suddenly found that the Germans were horrible and that they were patriots, which they hadn't realized until their real homeland was invaded. So, um, in the meantime, oddly enough, a military disciple of Petain's, a man named Charles de Gaulle, uh, shortly after France surrendered, declared from Britain that France had not surrendered and that the real France would continue to fight. And that was the beginning of what was called Free France, of which he was the head. And one by one, Free France was able to take most of the Vichy French colonies. Well, so things stood until 1942 when the Americans and the British attacked French North Africa, French Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. When they did that, the Germans immediately invaded Vichy France. But Pétain ordered the French fleet at Toulon scuttled so that the Germans couldn't get their hands on it. And he honored his agreement with Churchill.
So he
And
held up his end of the bargain while the Allies were picking to pieces the French uh, colonies.
yep, yep. Although it's funny, Roosevelt had given strict orders that the Guadeloupe and Martinique in the West Indies and Saint Pierre and Miquelon of Newfoundland, which were French colonies, should not be allowed to fall into the hands of the Free French, but should be taken by American forces.
Why
Well,
was he Roosevelt wanted a different man to be in
should
charge of
have
the Free French?
Yes, General Giraud. Well, because de Gaulle was very independent, and so he ordered Guadeloupe, Martinique, and Saint-Pierre-Miquelon seized by Free French forces, and that's exactly what happened. And Roosevelt was absolutely annoyed by de Gaulle.
As a Frenchman yourself, what are your what are your thoughts on the whole Vichy France and Free French conflict?
Well, I mean, Pétain was very much, he was handed a job that was very difficult. He hoped, and his initial collaborators hoped, that they could reorganize the country and bring about a national renaissance that would allow France, now purged of the Third Republic, to regain its place amongst the nations. What they, of course, could not and did not realize was the Germans had no interest in plans like that. And all of the Nazi talk about a pan European crusade against Bolshevism was just propaganda, which is ironic because if they'd meant it, they would have won the war. But fortunately or otherwise, they lied through their teeth.
So the Nazis basically set themselves up for failure.
Yeah, we sure
Yeah.
did. Uh, Pétain, I think, did the very best he could with what he had in the situation he was in. Uh, I wouldn't have wanted to be in his situation for all the tea in China.
He was considered a traitor afterwards, right?
Well, yeah and no. He was considered, don't forget that immediately after the occupation ended, the communists went on a crusade, knocking off a bunch of their old enemies, many of whom had nothing to do with the Germans. And they had become a major factor in the resistance. Now, of course, a lot of Petain's followers joined the resistance after 1942, when he was no longer really the dominant force. So it became a very messy, messy, messy thing. But a lot of Frenchmen collaborated the way people will always collaborate with regimes when they feel they don't have a choice. I mean, the example I like to give, when I was a young man, 11 and 12, the vast majority of people thought that abortion was murder, a horrible crime. Now, let's imagine that 50 or 60 years from now, attitudes have changed back in that direction. How will we look?
Not good.
Not good. Because how many of us have boldly stood up against abortion, gone into Operation Rescue, really showed the flag? Not many of us.
No.
Not many of us. So that's kind of the situation the people of occupied Europe were in. Why didn't the Nazis, or why didn't the Germans or the French or the Austrians or the Italians or anybody you like, why didn't they do more? Oh, for the same reason we don't.
Yeah.
People don't. I mean, the vast majority of people at any given moment just want to be left alone. Don't hurt me. Don't take my stuff. Don't starve me. Don't abuse me. And I'll do anything, literally anything, if you'll leave me alone. That's the real majority rule.
Though that rule doesn't even usually win either.
Sadly, no.
Yeah.
The sad thing is we're not, as large groups, we're just not heroes. Sometimes we're howling mobs, but we're never heroes.
Yeah, that's for sure. We have heroic moments from
Moments,
time to
but
time, but
they don't
that,
last, and they're
yeah,
usually the work of individuals or small groups.
yeah,
You rarely see large numbers of people doing anything heroic.
yeah. That's why I say your book is depressing.
Depressing?
Well, yeah,
All right. Are you ready?
yes.
Our history is an absolute tapestry of heroism from beginning to end. All of our presidents have been wise. All of our people have been brave and good. And indeed, the only real question in American history is why the country doesn't just float up to heaven.
Who got to you, Charles? Who got to you?
I've been fuchsia pilled. No, I mean, it's just the way things are. It's not just the United States, it's every country because that's the way people are. As a rule, people are not heroic.
America accepted the revolution first, though.
Well, yes. Well, yes and no. I mean, actually, the British Isles accepted the revolution first.
Okay.
Cromwell.
Yes. But weren't we part of them?
Well, we were. And New England,
So
of course, was all for him. But Virginia and Maryland had to be, as they put it, reduced. And the
well,
last
they
battle,
always get reduced.
yeah, sadly, but the last battle of the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, as the English Civil War is now much more poetically called, was fought not in England, not in Scotland, not in Ireland, but at Severn Creek in Maryland.
They just didn't know it was over.
Well, they did after Cromwell's men arrived. They found out real quick.
Okay.
But uh, with from that time on, the Puritan and the non-Puritan kind of jostled for position in the 13 colonies until finally the 13 oligarchies could agree on wanting to run their own show, and they did.
Would
And
you
there's
say would you say actually the Dutch accepted the revolution first then, if
the
anything?
Dutch.
Dutch
Well,
with
I
the
guess you could make that
Calvin
argument. You could make that argument.
or
Uh,
Geneva?
yeah, yeah, against Savoy. I mean, you certainly. One thing is the religious revolution definitely paved the way for the political revolution. There's no doubt about that. Henry VIII, by distributing all the monastery lands amongst his cronies, laid the foundation for the oligarchy that would murder Charles I and then later defeat George III.
Yep. Uh, but let's shift a
How's
little
that
focus.
depressing?
I don't know how to explain it to you, Charles, if you haven't gotten it yet.
Repeat after me. Wow, it's fun. Go ahead.
Wow, it's fun.
Now don't you feel better?
So much better. I mean, I feel great talking to you. It's just when I'm reading the depressingness.
It's not depressing.
I love your book. It's great. All of your books are great. You learn about everything and or everyone and everything before you get to the plot of the story.
Well, that's otherwise, how would you know what you were doing?
Well, the problem is today nobody knows what they're doing. So you have to tell them what they're doing.
Well, yeah, I'm working on a life of Empress Zeta right now.
Are
Uh,
you,
and part of the problem is that to understand her, you have to understand what she came from.
why don't you just copy and paste the first part of or is this one focused heavily on the French then?
Well,
Is
the
that
French, the Spanish, the Portuguese.
okay, that's basically most of Europe.
Yeah, and that's what she was heiress to. And right now, what I have to explain is the difference between the kind of monarchy that Britain at the time, this is after the Napoleonic Wars, and their devotees in France, Spain, and Portugal wanted, and the kind of monarchy that Zeta's forebears wanted. There's a
Yeah.
big difference. And of course, the kind of government that we have today in the United States and around the globe is a development of exactly what Zeta's forebears were fighting.
See, you
We
wouldn't
have
have to
reaped the
do this
benefits of
though.
their defeat.
You wouldn't have to do this though if education worked properly.
Well, that's true. I mean, if people were taught anything, I'd be out of a job.
Well, I think there's a difference between taught the basics and taught the deeper meaning or the
Yeah, but
deeper story.
they get neither, so it's okay.
Okay, then that's why you're here.
That's right. Let's see. Just remember, willful ignorance on the part of our masters is what keeps me employed.
Well, what would you do? You'd probably be like I don't know, you'd be an advisor to a king or something maybe if
I'd, pro-
otherwise
I'd probably be court jester.
well, that's kind of an advisor.
Oh yes, the jester can tell the truth when no one else can.
So, either way, or you'd be like I don't know, you'd be his secretary or something.
Can I
Right,
take dictation, boss?
writing stories. Maybe you'd be doing that.
Or I would have stayed in comedy.
Yeah. Is that's what pushed you out of comedy? The lack of knowledge of people? Did people didn't get your jokes?
No, 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 it wasn't that.
Oh,
I
okay.
always knew to play to my audience. It was writing a book.
The is it every
Every man today call Rome. Yeah,
yes. Okay.
I made
Yeah.
the mistake of writing a book. I got published. And before you know it, I had to choose between writing and comedy, and writing won.
So it's like you fell into it.
Yeah, pretty
You
much.
you fell on pen and paper and you just,
Like some people fall on their sword. Yes.
you fell on yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the other countries and their sort of status and how they sort of went from World War II into the New World. Uh, so we have Czechoslovakia. It was the first to get well, at least occupied. Well, at least Sudetenland at least was occupied, and then you have the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia being created. Tell us a little bit about the Protectorate.
Well, basically, the Germans after Munich, they made a deal. They get Sudetenland. Hungary got the southern part of Slovakia, and Poland got Teschen, little area up there. Uh, but in March of 1939, the Germans unilaterally changed the rules. They invaded Bohemia. Slovakia became independent. Ruthenia was snatched by Hungary. And the Bohemian Moravian Protectorate was created under a man called Emil Hacha, who was the Czech president. You see, after Munich, Prime Minister Beneš resigned, and he was replaced by this Hacha fellow who did what he could in a very unpleasant situation, and he was executed after the war by the communists for his pains. But interestingly enough, uh, the joke is that the Allies betrayed Czechoslovakia and honored their commitments to Poland. So Warsaw was blown to smithereens, and Prague is pristine and beautiful.
Okay, interesting.
Such is history.
That's what happens when you're allies with the United States.
British and French at that point.
Oh, British and French. Oh, okay.
1939, the beginning of the war.
Well,
So,
I mean, the French weren't doing anything at the end, though.
oh ho ho! You really think so?
I don't know. Explain to me what they were doing.
I will. They had fought in Italy. I mean, they fought the Japanese in Indochina. They fought the Italians and the Germans in North Africa. In fact, General Leclerc, when the Allies, remember they had taken Algeria and all that, and the British and others were pushing westward from Egypt because Libya, you see, had been an Italian colony. But General Leclerc led a column of French and native troops over the desert from Chad and arrived just in time to help seal the end of Axis North Africa.
That sounds a little bit like the uh in World War One, the Polish army like going through Russia and then like coming around all the way back to Poland in the end.
That was the Czech Legion, I think.
Thought that was Poland.
Well, maybe Polish Legion. Could be.
I thought
They both
thought they
did
were
it.
they both really the Czechs did that too.
Yeah, after selling Admiral Kolchak to the Reds as the price of getting out of Russia,
Wait, what year was that?
1920.
Oh,
See,
okay.
they were formed from Russian prisoners from the Austrian army,
Wow.
and they made their way. They fought alongside the White Russians during the Civil War, but when they realized the Whites weren't going to win, they figured they wanted to get out of Dodge, and so they took Admiral Kolchak prisoner, handed him over to the Reds. The Reds killed him, and they allowed the Czechs to leave.
How good of them?
Yeah, it was very honorable, chivalrous, etc.
They gave up the admiral. The admiral.
The leader of their allies. What, do you think that was dishonorable, saving their own skins by selling out a man who'd fought alongside them for 3 years?
A bit.
Aren't we judgmental?
What is our job then?
What do you mean?
Aren't we judging the situation?
No, I can't. I'm from California. We don't
Ugh.
judge. We just accept.
Stop accepting, Charles. You're also French.
Well, there's that. The French are not terribly accepting.
No, you got to be snob. No, what?
Snobbish?
Snobbish.
The French aren't
I
snobbish.
can't
They're
speak apparently.
the French are self-accepting. They're not snobbish.
Self-accepting.
No, it's true.
So the Californians are accepting of everyone else, and the French are self-accepting.
Yeah.
So what does that make you? You've accepted yourself and everyone.
And everyone else, yeah. See? So everyone's wonderful in my book.
Talk about rose-colored glasses.
Well, self-delusion is the key to positive thinking. You should know that. It's great. Remember, sanity is only something you punish your friends with.
So you're punishing me,
Yeah, I'd guess so. Yeah.
and I'll punish you back.
No, you mustn't. I'm old.
What? So I must be your enemy, but you must be my friend.
No. It doesn't work like that at all. So you're putting too much thought into it. It's like this. There's a division of labor in the world. I dish it out and everyone else takes it. Now do we understand?
Yes, yes, sir.
There we go. See, I knew you'd see reason. No, seriously though, our listeners will want something more than this kind of bizarre banter. What else you got for me?
Well, okay, so Slovakia wasn't Slovakia run by a priest?
It sure was. In Central Europe, the Catholic political parties, going back in the 19th century, were very often run by priests. This was true among the Czechs, the Croats, the Slovenes, the Austrians, the Hungarians, and the Slovaks. And so, under Czechoslovakia, the Slovaks who where the Czechs have been under the Austrians for centuries, the Slovaks have been under the Hungarians. So, although they were somewhat related people, they were very different, and their experiences were very different. So, the Slovaks soon became somewhat disenchanted with the Czech rule. Uh, and one of the
Shocking.
leaders, what's that?
Shocking.
No, well, one of the leaders of the Slovak Nationalist Party was a priest called Father Hlinka, who had been a thorn in the side of the Hungarians before World War I, and became a thorn in the side of the Czechs. But he died in 1938, and he was succeeded by another priest, Monsignor Tiso, as head of the party. And so when the Germans occupied Bohemia Moravia, the Slovaks saw their chance and declared their independence under Monsignor Tiso. For him to continue in power, he had to form an alliance with the Germans, which he did. But he never declared war on the United States. He
Interesting.
wouldn't do it.
Gotcha. It's interesting all these different like small kingdoms, or not kingdoms, small
Puppet
uh
states.
puppet states, but sort of independently they weren't the worst, I guess.
No, I mean, they all of them, again, like ourselves in abortion, they all of them had to collaborate to a greater or lesser degree just to survive. And of course, that's not a glamorous role, being the leader of an occupied people, especially when your occupier is pretty evil and is constantly demanding more and more and more out of you.
They held out for a good amount of time.
Well, they did, and then in the end, Tiso kind of tolerated what was called the Slovak National Rising.
What was
But
that?
well, it was just what it sounds like. In '44, as the Russians got closer, the Slovaks revolted against the Germans, but it was put down pretty quickly and pretty nastily.
Gotcha. It seems like the royalist and traditionalist factions of Europe took a beating from sort of both sides
You know,
in during World War II.
well, see, they were faced with what we call in English Hobson's choice. That is to say, there isn't a good choice. You could uh, ally with the Axis and hope to get some of your program accomplished, despite the fact that they hate you, um, and then be destroyed with them in 1945. Or you could join the resistance alongside the socialists, liberals, and communists, and then become utterly irrelevant by 1968. So those are your choices. In Austria, it was particularly grotesque because the resistance in Austria, apart from the communists, was almost entirely Catholic and monarchist. The socialists collaborated under their worthless leader, Karl Renner, who was a big Nazi brown noser. But I mean that in the best possible sense, of course. I'm not judging.
You're not judging?
No. I'm
No.
accepting and celebrating the choices Karl Renner made.
Okay.
So, what happened then was that the Archduke Otto, the heir to the throne, spent the war years in Austria and convinced Roosevelt, not in Austria, in the United States, it convinced Roosevelt that Austria was in fact as much a victim as any other country, the first victim, and that's why Austria was independent after the war. But he sent his younger brothers in 1944, after they finished school in Quebec, he sent them into the Tyrol to fight with the resistance against the Nazis. All right, well, the Soviets invade from the east, the war ends. Karl Renner presents his services as any good prostitute would to Joe Stalin, who makes him chancellor. By this time, the Archduke Otto has arrived in Austria, and he and his brothers have set up shop in Innsbruck, in Tyrol, which was occupied by the French. And Renner invoked the Habsburg law and had them expelled from the country.
Well, but what were the French doing?
Well, they weren't in a position to do anything about it because everything in Austria had to be cleared by the four power board of control: the British, the Americans, the Soviets, and the French.
That's just a terrible name too for something.
You think so?
Board of control.
Yeah, they had another name for it, but that's what it was. So they all endorsed Renner as chancellor, and the French were ordered to comply by their
So
wonderful allies.
was was Churchill on the was he a naysayer in that, or
He
was
was out of
he?
power. Remember,
Oh, he was.
yeah, it was Clement Attlee, the labor man, the socialist.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so basically, literally, the end of the war leads the well, so I mean, the French were still De Gaulle, right? But
Yeah,
at the end, but we have Attlee as prime minister. You have Stalin in the Soviet Union, and you have Truman.
that's right.
That's a terrible combination.
It was a terrible combination, and it certainly didn't do Austria, the Habsburgs, any good.
Yeah.
So, and the funny thing about it is that now, as I say, Austria had been a victim nation. Now, the socialist inspired education industry here talks about the myth of a victim nation. Well, it was a myth to the degree that the socialists were collaborators.
and you're
That part's true.
and you're teaching us, so they're teaching the students how they're terrible, right?
Yeah, because Austrians collaborated. But
But
the
they're
only
teaching
Austrians
how
who
bad.
collaborated, the Austrians who collaborated were the socialists who were doing the teaching. Maybe if they just shut their mouths and perhaps had them sewn up, that would help,
That's kind of impressive.
isn't it?
Yeah, it's an impressive situation
And
to.
uh, and as a result, real uh, resistance heroes like Father Heinrich Meyer and Andreas Hofer and Caronazzi and a bunch of these guys who were monarchists, were Catholic, fought the Nazis at every turn. They're forgotten.
Why would you even want? So I guess that's the reason they want you to forget that.
They
That.
want you to forget that their ideological forebears sucked up to the Nazis,
But
while their ideological opponents fought them.
why would you then explain the myth of, like, why would you point out that you're terrible so everyone else is terrible?
Exactly. It's not our people are terrible. It's we're all terrible.
Oh, okay, yes. So accusing people of doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Remember, if you project your own failings onto other people, you'll feel better about yourself, and you might convince them that you're not the scumbag you really are.
Maybe it will change it. It will completely make it
Yeah, you
the
might
other
go
way
from being
around.
a scumbag to being a decent human being through osmosis. Could happen.
Yeah. Yeah. That, wow.
I wouldn't bet the farm on it though, but it could happen. You never know.
Yeah. Even in Germany there were resistance to the Nazis.
There was a very strong resistance, but again, monarchists, noblemen, people we don't like.
Why were monarchists and traditionalists always why were they always set up poorly in the end to r- gain any power?
Well, they were set up poorly in the end, partly because they weren't political, partly because the United States, uh, partly because the United States, at the end of the day, didn't like those kinds of people. And neither did the Soviets. And it was the United States and the Soviets who were calling the shots in Europe at that time. It's a little bit like in the colonial world, where our British, French, Dutch, Portuguese allies found themselves fighting rebels backed by both the Soviets and the Americans.
We really know how to pick them.
Well, we've got the best kind of government money can buy.
Yeah, we're both trying to take down the big baddie while trying to undermine all our allies.
Yeah,
It's like we're trying to create more enemies.
no, no, we're just wonderful. See, one thing you should bear in mind is that the vast majority of Americans, and that includes our politicians, really have little interest in foreign affairs and less knowledge of it. We really, we really don't care. Do you know less than 20% of Americans have passports? And of those, very few actually ever use them.
I'm one of the people who doesn't have a passport.
See?
But you're blaming me?
You personally. Yes. I hope you enjoy it. No, I'm just pointing out that the vast majority of Americans have no interest and less knowledge about things overseas. And so they're not really in a position to understand or realize the horrible things their government do in their name.
Yeah. See, I'm the kind of the opposite. I'm much more interested in the old world than the new.
Well, take it from one who lived most of his life in the new and currently lives in the old. They both got something to say for them.
Yeah, I mean, I probably wouldn't fit in the old though. Even though I have such an interest in the old, I don't know if I'd fit in.
Well, you never know that about anything until you try. Uh,
Yeah, but I'm
but
bad at languages.
do you speak English?
It uh,
Well, you'll find young people across the continent speak English.
Sure, but I just feel bad. I'm like, well, I like, if I was in a situation, I should dedicate more time to learning other languages.
All you have to do is say, "Look, I'm an American. I expect service." They like it when you're upfront like that.
See,
They
that's what I'm saying.
appreciate it.
I don't
What?
want to. I wouldn't want to do that.
You wouldn't want to be the ugly American?
Is that how they treat you?
Well, no, but I don't say things like that. I'm
Well, then
actually treated
again,
quite nicely.
you know enough languages.
And the truth of the matter is, they're very pleasant people. There are differences from one country to the next, but it's like with the French. Americans, especially the Parisians, Americans consider them to be terribly rude. It's not true. It's just the opposite. They're extremely formal. And when an American goes into a shop and says, "Hi, do you have blah 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 blah?" they get very bad receptions. Whereas what you do when you go into such a place is you say "Bonjour, madame" or "Bonjour, monsieur," and you wait for them to say "Bonjour, monsieur." And then, if you're smart, you'll have learned enough to say "Je m'excuse, je ne parle pas de français.
Yeah,
Parlez-vous l'anglais, s'il vous plaît?"
I'll have to try and remember that if I ever go
Well,
to France.
there's a key phrase to remember when you're in France. If you ever have a problem, you go up to anybody you go up to and say, "Pardonnez-moi, s'il vous plaît, j'ai un petit problème."
What does that mean?
Says, "Pardon me, if you please, I have a little problem." That's the magic word.
What if you have a big problem?
Understatement is good.
Oh, okay.
And then they will do their best to help you out with it. I mean, if you just say, "Pardon me, do you know how to get to blah, blah, blah?" No. "Pardon me, I have a little problem." "What's that?" "Well, I have to go to Rue, blah, blah, blah. And I don't know how to get there." "Oh, well, I can show you." And half the time they'll actually walk you there.
So it's all about approach.
Hmm. Which is true in America as well.
Yeah. Hmm. It's like people are people no matter where they are.
Yeah, you just got to figure out. If you figure out their differences, you'll see whether they're the same, paradoxical as that may be. And let's not forget our wonderful Southern expression, "bless her heart."
Which is an insult.
It means I hope she dies shrieking.
Yeah.
Yeah, which reminds me of a wonderful old joke.
What is that?
When I die, I want to go peacefully in my sleep like my grandfather, not shrieking and yelling like the passengers in his car.
Okay.
There.
There.
It's like the fellows at the doctor. The
Yeah.
doctor says, "Do any of your families suffer from mental illness?" "No, they all seem to enjoy it."
Oh my. But yeah, do you think we'll get out of this post World War II debacle?
Depends on what you mean by get out of it. We have, in one sense, in that the Soviet Union is no longer with us. But unfortunately, the same kind of stupidity and short sightedness that put us there in the first place has been with us ever since. I mean, just to give you one example, Mr. Bush Sr. vetoing Romania and Bulgaria restoring their monarchies, which would have done a lot for those two countries. Uh, Mr. Bush Jr. not only vetoing the restoration of the Afghan monarchy, which was the only thing that would have gotten that country out of the pit it was in, but having his emissary do so in public on television. After that, there was no way the Afghan government we installed could be seen as anything other than an American puppet.
How wonderful.
Well, it's as American as apple pie.
Is the only hope for success is the American decline?
No, the hope for American success, there are three different things. One, of course, is the conversion of the United States to Catholicism. That would be helpful. Beyond that, um, for Americans to take more of an interest in the world, for them to be better educated. You know, I wrote my history not simply to depress young men in the Midwest, although that was an enjoyable byproduct. Uh,
I see how it is.
yeah, well, but it was also to spur further study. You know, if you look at the book, you'll notice a lot of names are in italics. Well, those are meant to be looked up. And mind you, uh, we didn't have Wikipedia when I wrote the book, but it would have been a real boon if we had. It would have been great.
Yeah. I mean, everyone should go out and get your book, Puritan's Empire. Links will be in the description.
No, that'd
Best
be
place
good.
to get it? Where would you say? Tumblr House?
I would say Tumblr House, but it's also available on Amazon and various other places. But Tumblr House is probably the best place to order it. And if you order two of them, you get free shipping and handling.
Free
Operators are
shipping and
standing by. Free shipping and handling. Operators are standing by. Some assembly required. Be the first on your block. Act now while supplies last. Not an actor. Void
You're
were
not an
prohibited.
actor?
No. Void were prohibited, and sorry, no CODs.
I still think you might be an actor.
Well, I was, but I'm
See?
retired.
Ha!
I'm retired.
So only
Not retarded, retired.
I
There's a difference.
I didn't say that.
Yeah, well, you thought it.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, says you.
Well, thank you all for watching. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Uh, Charles, people can find you at off the menu. I'll have links in the description for that too. And you're doing another show. Can you tell
Yes,
everyone about that?
I can. It's called The Never Ending Struggle. It's high and low points in Catholic Church history. It is to be seen on Mondays, I think, on Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Um, yeah, vmpr.org, I think it is. Or via Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Yeah, VMPR. See? I just look senile. I actually do remember stuff. Yeah, so
I don't think anyone thinks you're senile.
that's too bad. It would give me a lot of leeway if they did. But at any rate, seriously, ladies and gentlemen, you can also look at my stuff at Catholicism.org, at the European Conservative, Crisis, Peter 1-5. I think that's it right now.
It's one. 1 Peter 5.
That's it, 1 Peter 5, and the Catholic Herald. It's a
Well,
lot of stuff, ladies and gentlemen.
you're doing a lot. Thank you for your work. Thank you for all that you give your listeners, your watchers, and your readers.
Well, I'll tell you, my listeners, my watchers, and my readers, um, well, they tend to be like yourself, young people. You're very much our future, and if in my little bit of work I've been able to do anything to benefit your quest for truth, then it's all worth it,
Well,
without a shadow of a doubt.
well, thank you, and everyone. God bless.